hard on a family. It really is, especially when you love that person so much and you believe in them so much and you have such a daunting Goliath of an opponent. It's challenging. It's kind of like a death in a way when you go like, no, that can't be true, and then you're like, oh yeah, it's true. And you go through that kind of shock. His dad, my husband, of course, he's trying to keep our business going so we have livelihood. And his sister is in Australia, and she's been helping too from there.
I'm Ross's sister, and I can tell you he has been a man of his word and honor all his life. I was shocked to hear the news of his arrest, but felt even more dismayed at what the media was writing about him, not even knowing him.
You know, I read things by people who don't have a clue who Ross really is. He's been tried and convicted in the media. Nothing has been proven at all. I don't know what's happened to the presumption of innocence in this country, but it is a constitutional right here that we are innocent until proven guilty.
Hello. Alex, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the film.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
So as we saw in the trailer, we all know the headlines, right? The trailer kind of depicts the headlines, but I think a lot of people don't know the story behind the scenes, the pieces of the puzzle that the headlines and the media is missing. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to me about some of the stuff you were most surprised to learn as you dug deeper into this case?
Yeah, I get asked that question a fair amount, and you know, it's a valid question. The problem is that it was one of those stories that every day was revelatory. Every day was a surprise. I knew a lot about the technology. I knew a lot about the sort of the evolution of these technologies, how privacy and anonymity communities grew on the internet since the 80s, even the 70s, pre-internet, pre-web. But you know, delving into this movie deals with so many unknowns and so many questions. Like, how does law enforcement investigate cases in anonymous networks in the digital age? How do those cases then get tried in a federal court? How is technology and radical technologies driving drug policy? What are our rights to privacy and anonymity today in the digital age? And you know, what are search and seizure laws? There were just so many issues that the story relates to that pretty much every day was some kind of revelation. I'd say that one of the earliest surprises that I had that I did not expect as I entered the Silk Road community and the deep web community, or the darknet community, I should say, was how, and it made sense in retrospect, but I was expecting, maybe because of the way the media had portrayed the story, the propaganda kind of seeped into my own head, and I was expecting just like Breaking Bad on the internet, you know? And really what I encountered, and this is not like to exonerate them at all, it's not a moral judgment, it's just factual, that what I encountered was the architects of the Silk Road and the people behind these technologies, whether you like them or not, whether they're criminal or not, they were very bright, very tech adept, very political, like to a man. Everybody I spoke to in that world was very politically motivated.
Far more philosophical and political than I think you probably assumed, right?
Much more than I expected. And I expected a couple of them, but then it was sort of, and then another, and then another. And these are not people who knew each other. These are people who are in different parts of the world. Some of them had already gone to jail. Some of them were on their way to jail. Some of them were on the lam. But they were all very political, very technologically adept. Some of them came from the hacktivist movement. Some of them didn't. Some of them were quite young and had just come out of college or whatever. But that was unexpected.
Did you find any of them have a main goal of trying to make a profit off of what they were doing, or was it mainly philosophical, political?
You know, largely the core architects of the Silk Road that I connected with were not profit motivated and didn't have any money. Like in the present day, did not live. They were mostly like grad students. Like they didn't come from money. They didn't have money. Some of them had made money during the Silk Road period and sort of were back living a more hacktivist kind of existence. I met a couple that were just. I met one individual alone who had a father who was really sick with cancer, and he was young and reckless, and had gotten into the Silk Road and become quite a big vendor, gotten caught and was going to jail. It was very contrite about it and was like, look, just to be really, like, this was one person I met who was like, this was really stupid. I really got in over my head. I really was trying to make money for my family, and now I'm going to jail for the next 8 years. They even tried to put his mom in jail because the drugs, were being transacted through his home, and he lived at home still. He was only 20 years old. So it was really catastrophic. But he wasn't high up the food chain at the Silk Road. He was just one of the vendors that I encountered. The actual architects there that I met were much more politically oriented, which in retrospect wasn't that surprising because the darknet in those days and navigating Tor, we can get into all that in those days, was a little cumbersome in 2010 and 2011 and 2012.
You had to be a very early adopter.
Exactly. You had to really know your way around these technologies. And to engage in radical activity on the internet anonymously is very, very hard. To remain anonymous online, even in the darknet, is very hard. And one mistake and you're done. So it took a level of acumen even to be able to operate in that space.
So now, a lot of this movie has to do with the idea of sort of symbolic deterrence, right? Ross has become a symbol to deter people from creating something like Silk Road, to work within something like Silk Road. But that's not working, and that's not going to work. And it becomes a whole idea about the drug war and how for the past 4 decades, we've only had almost symbolic deterrence in how we enforce and police drugs.
Yeah, I think that, no matter what you think of these services, no matter what you think about Ross Ulbricht and what he did, and what we know of Ross is that he created the Silk Road, and he's been convicted of running the Silk Road. And there's, the family is appealing that, and he has claimed that he didn't run it the whole time, and there's contention around that, and but the fact is he has been convicted for that. So, the question that now remains as he faces sentencing on Friday is what level of punishment will be meted out, and punishments in the drug war are very, very severe, and punishments in the cyberspace are very, very severe. Some would even say overly severe, given the level of crime that sometimes, if you look at the Aaron Swartz case, Barrett Brown, Jeremy Hammond, people who are tried and convicted for cyber crimes generally get very, very intense sentences, sometimes much more not commensurate with the same crime in the physical space. So Ross is at kind of a double jeopardy of being convicted for a drug kingpin charge, which carries, up to life in prison, and computer hacking charges, which also carry stiff penalties. So as a deterrent, to answer your question specifically, there's no evidence that putting Ross away for the rest of his life is going to deter what is already the proliferation of drug markets on the darknet. And it's very similar to what we saw happen with Napster, where Napster was a central server. It was seized and shut down. A bunch of copycat single server technologies appeared in its wake. That's what we're seeing in the wake of the Silk Road going down. There are many, 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 many drug markets that have appeared in its wake.
Well, to put it more simply, you directed a documentary about Napster and sort of the rise of Napster, the rise of pirating music and pirating movies. And would you say that record executives, entertainment executives, reacted the same way to Napster the way that the Justice Department reacts to something like Silk Road now?
Yeah, I think that there are ways in which people react to these technologies that are valid, and there are ways that are extreme or misdirected.
What's valid? Let's start there.
I think that to look at disruptive technologies and say, look, whether this has a positive use or not, it is beyond existing law. I think it's inarguable, right? That was the case with Napster, and that's the case with the Silk Road. There are people who will argue that these services are 100% heroic, that that the laws really don't matter, and I think that laws do matter. I think that we don't want to just completely jump off a cliff into a lawless society. So I think that those are accurate ways of describing highly disruptive is such an overused term today, but Napster and Silk Road I think could genuinely be called disruptive technologies. They changed the world in radical ways. And they change the world in ways that are morally and ethically complicated. I don't think that they are easy. And I wouldn't be so glib to say that they were both easy, even though I think they may both have had good uses. But then you have this extremely ignorant reactionary response as well, which we saw in the case of Napster. I would argue to this day. I'm still flummoxed and somewhat dismayed that large institutions, both in the media and in various industries, still can't wrap their head around what works about these technologies, why there is good there, and how we can possibly work with them to see a way forward. In the Silk Road's case, I would say that there was this darknet bad kind of reaction, the same way we had Napster bad. And it's painting the whole privacy and anonymity side of the internet with this black brush. You're all criminals. You know?
want privacy if you want anonymity. Basically, you are engaging in criminal actions of
Absolutely.
some kind.
Yeah, if you use Tor, which was the technology that you used to access the dark net, then you're a criminal, which, I mean, the Tor was created by the government.
Right.
And it's largely used by the government, and it's largely used by journalists and dissidents, and it is not a black hat tool for criminals. It can be used for criminals, just like the alley across the street could be used to sell hot dogs or could be used to sell drugs.
And to be clear, journalists use Tor often to hide from dictators, to hide from people in their country who may prosecute them because they're speaking against power.
Yeah.
It's not just, as he said, for crimes, but if you were wondering why journalists would use something like that,
and to protect their
that's why.
sources. I mean,
Yes.
journalists need to protect their sources. It's very, very important, and their sources aren't going to talk to them if they feel they're vulnerable. So I think that what happened was the dark net is the hidden side of the internet. It grew up over the last several decades because basically the architects of the original internet and people like the cypherpunks, movements back in the early days of the net, looked forward and realized, look, the internet is going to explode. It's going to be a very big part of human culture. We're going to need privacy and anonymity within that space as much as we do in the physical space, if not more. They were very forward thinking. You fast forward to 2015, and people who are cavalier about their privacy, people who say, well, I got nothing to hide, why should I have anything to fear? It's a very cavalier mentality. And in the age of the Sony hack and the Target hack and the Anthem Blue Cross hack, where suddenly, people like you and me are having their social security numbers, their medical records, their children's photographs, naked photographs of themselves online, whatever, stolen and either sold online or trafficked online.
Naked photographs of me? Stolen?
Sorry,
Traffic?
Ricky.
Sold?
You guys, he doesn't know about the photographs of him online.
Please,
Right.
please then return them to my desk as soon as possible.
Especially naked photographs of you.
Print them out, delete, return them to my desk. Thank you.
We live in an age where you can't be cavalier about your privacy. Your entire life is online. I would say that you actually have to be more concerned about your privacy on the digital space than you do in the physical space today, because that information is far more personal. You don't walk around on the street with your banking records taped to your forehead. But if somebody hacks into your space, or not even your space, they hack into your health insurance technology, or they hack into your bank, then all of your private information is going to be public. And so we do live in an age where we have to be more aware of the need for privacy and encryption online. That may make it more difficult for certain areas of law enforcement, but unfortunately, that's the reality of the world that we live in.
Certain areas of law enforcement, as well as state surveillance, though. I mean, when we're talking about why journalists might need privacy on the internet, I can imagine people from the government being like, yeah. Should
No, you
journalists need privacy?
Just
Like,
keep
no.
doing what you're doing.
They'll be fine. Talk to
Yeah.
me. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I would say that there are sort of three tiers of protection that you need. Government overreach is certainly one of them. In this sort of drug war zeal to surveil the world, and you have to remember that this surveillance started with the drug war. It did not start with 9/11. The DEA began mass surveillance long before 9/11 happened and the Patriot Act was enacted, Patriot Act. So the drug war really led surveillance. So government overreach is something we have to be mindful of. Corporate overreach is something we have to be mindful of. The need to protect yourself from third-party people who are selling your information, Google, Facebook, AT&T, it's just the way those technologies function. It requires them to know as much about you as humanly possible. If you knew what information Google actually used of yours, you would be mortified.
Like what?
Well,
Nude pictures of me again?
Only of you. But voice recognition, anything you type into a Google search, it's just your whereabouts. If you use Google Maps, then all of your data for everywhere you go, all day, every day, 24 hours a day is being recorded. And people say, well, so what? No one's looking at it. It's like, well, they may not be looking at it today. Well, the fact is actually they are looking at it today. I'm sorry to tell you, but not only is it being looked at, but it's being stored. which means it may be of some use down the road to somebody for whatever reason we don't know. So that's an issue. The third one is, of course, hacking. And so you've got government overreach, you've got corporate overreach, and you've got just plain old bad actors on the internet who may want to sell your information. All three of those are pretty good reasons to want to protect your privacy. And so what we're seeing in the wake of things like the Sony hack and the Target hack and the Edward Snowden revelations is that we are this little blip in time where people don't care about their privacy. That's going to change. There's going to be a massive privacy movement that grows up out of the next wave of technology. There's going to be a booming industrial business in the privacy age, so that your grandmother is going to be using PGP encryption. She's not going to even know she's using it. She'll be using Bitcoin protocols, the blockchain. She's not going to know she's using it. Encryption and privacy will be baked into the very sort of everyday technologies that you use.
And this is why the story of Ross and the Silk Road is not just about drug dealing.
Exactly.
It has greater philosophical implications.
Exactly. I mean, there are issues around the Silk Road. There are two primary issues around the Silk Road case that hit on this directly. One is there is contention around how the Silk Road servers were found, because they were found by the FBI within Tor hidden services, which means the servers were hidden, which means they're not supposed to be found, which means you need to implement some technological way of penetrating Tor, which is the way into this space, in order to find these servers. We don't know how they found them.
To which, at the very least, you need a warrant to do, right?
Which they do not appear to have had.
Yeah.
So there are questions around search and seizure in the digital age. There are the motivations for the Silk Road in the first place. Again, it's not to exonerate it. Bleeding edge technologies like drug dealing, like music piracy, like pornography, have all led most innovations in technology, because where there is a will, there is a way. There's human nature is going to build a tool to do the things that it wants to do. Sex and drugs and music happen to be three of the main things people like to do.
Such a bummer.
Yeah.
Everything you like to do on your phone is because people like
who
pornography.
knew, right? So where there's a will, there's a way. People will innovate vigorously in those areas, and they will tend to innovate technologically in those areas. So it's not to say they're right or wrong. In fact, they're usually beyond the law, but their innovation often occurs in those spaces. So whatever you want to think about Silk Road, the motives for the markets like the Silk Road, the motives for creating the darknet, the motives for things like Tor grew out of a desire for privacy and anonymity. So there's that other component of why it relates to the Silk Road case, is that the very motive for the Silk Road was caught up in a movement for privacy and anonymity that goes back to the beginning of the internet.
No, we're talking about the philosophical implications of this, but let's talk about Ross's family a little bit. You spent a lot of time with them. Talk to me about their mental state going through this, how they felt about the charges, everything.
Yeah, I mean, the movie isn't really it's thematically about asking questions, maybe somewhat unanswerable questions, right? Certainly not about answering questions, and that extends to the case of the guy at the middle of the whole story, whom nobody knows, right? You have this guy, Ross Ulbricht. He's now 31. He was in his 20s when he was arrested in San Francisco. Very little is known about Ross other than a composite of what everybody has to say about him. So the movie is also talking about, how do you even tell stories about situations that occur in this anonymous space where you're dealing with, these marketplaces or these technologies that were created from behind a laptop. And so for Ross's family, one day they're with this kid in San Francisco because the family's very, very close. And he's this, brilliant young man who put himself through 2 full scholarships. He has a master's in mechanical engineering from Penn State. According to his friends, his whole life, lovely, pacifistic, family-oriented guy. Suddenly is arrested and accused with being a drug kingpin and a potentially murderous drug kingpin at that. Though no murders occurred, via Silk Road. There were these alleged murder for hires. Ross was never charged for those crimes. He wasn't indicted in the end for those crimes.
Which I was surprised to see in the movie. I think a lot of people don't know, like the movie shows, people don't know that those charges didn't exist.
Correct. He was not indicted or charged for attempted murder.
I feel like, sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
I feel like that's where everybody sort of philosophically shifts on the whole thing, where I think
Right.
people think to themselves, okay, well, he was facilitating a drug network of some kind. I understand drugs. That's not that big of a deal. Everyone's going to do drugs all the time. Whoa, murder for hire, back up. He needs to be prosecuted.
Right.
And no one really knows. The media has kind of dropped the ball on the fact that he was never actually prosecuted for that.
I think that it was used in the trial as part of what is referred to as an overt act, meaning if you present these implications and you don't indict someone for them, then you don't actually have to prove them. So you're allowed to mention them in court, but the burden of proof is not put upon the prosecution. So they don't actually have to prove that he did these. They can just talk about them. Talking about murder to a jury has an effect on the jury, needless to say. So it's an area of law that is totally valid, but it's a tough end of the stick to be on. And so the charges against Ross that he has been convicted for are nonviolent offenses. And the reality of it is just to circle back to the original question. For Ross's parents, it was, okay, so our son was a drug kingpin who was running this service, allegedly, this is before he was convicted, and may have attempted to have people killed. I mean, the level of process that they had to go through just on that was already horrific. But then you add to that, now they have to become experts in Tor, Bitcoin, encryption, the dark net. I mean, these are people who didn't know how to operate an iPhone the day that their son was arrested. And what the film charts is really, the film in a way is really, from a human standpoint, about two sets of people. It's about Ross's parents on the one hand, and the journalistic community, the tech community on the other hand, that was deep inside this story. Both sides of these camps were trying to figure out who the hell is this kid? Like, what is the truth? What actually happened? And make some sense of it all. And the movie doesn't wrap it up in a neat little bow because I don't think these questions really got answered.
But it's somewhere in the middle.
It's somewhere in the middle. You have the parents on the one hand who end up feeling one way about it. You have Andy Greenberg from Wired who followed the story closely, who we follow closely, who ends up feeling kind of another way about it. So we examine these sort of two divergent paths in a way. But the parents had to become not only educated about technology, they became radicalized. They actually became advocates for digital rights. And I don't think they even quite realized, because I really followed them closely, I don't think they even realized that it surpassed their son's case. Like, I would be at talks that Lynn, that's Ross's mom, was giving, an older woman who's raised two kids, talking in detail about digital law, constitutional law, encryption, the future of internet rights. And it was staggering to watch, frankly.
And not to diminish it at all, but you find this happens often with parents of children who suffer some kind of tragedy or injustice. They become advocates against that injustice that
there's no doubt. The motives are completely, not surprising. The level of acumen that she acquired was surprising because I've dealt with people in the tech press who can't explain Tor as well as Lynn Ulbricht can. And her level of comprehension of these areas is truly amazing. And so what that said to me was, it was a really good way of charting, I think, the education process that the public is going to go through. Because I think, in a way, we're all Lynn Ulbricht. And I don't mean that in some kind of martyr way. I'm not trying to say, that it means Ross is a martyr. I'm really cautious to not go there, because I don't believe it's not even how I feel. But we are all, in a way, having to rapidly educate ourselves to why these issues matter, because one by one, these issues come home to roost for each one of us. And I don't think anybody cares about any of these issues until your identity is stolen, you're hacked, you're on the wrong end of the Sony hack, whatever it is. When these issues become personalized for you, you begin to realize, oh, privacy does matter. These issues do matter. I can't just sit on the sidelines and go, I don't care, I got nothing to hide.
You talk about how you feel. I think the film does come away with a very distinct feeling of how you feel, which is about Ross and a certain amount of sympathy and empathy for him. Well, maybe you don't think he should go away or that he should go away forever, but you see him as a person and that this is a life that is about to end.
I think for me, in terms of Ross, I would view the way I present him in the movie as compassion. I would say that, for me, and we stated in the movie, we don't have a complete picture of this guy. What we've done is we've shown that because there was so little information for the public and the media and the government to grapple with about who he was specifically, everybody imposed their own ideas on Ross. He was Walter White, bad guy of the internet, drug kingpin of the internet. He was
Martyr for electronic freedom.
Exactly,
Yeah.
martyr for the electronic cause. He was libertarian, philosophical wunderkind. He was non-libertarian, radical, revolutionary, anarchist. All of these things were completely opposing.
He was a nickname from The Princess Bride.
Exactly. Maybe he wasn't him at all, and he was totally framed. And, for me, the movie is about showing all of these different perspectives that everybody had, how they impose their own perceptions onto him and the story. It's happening to me even post having made the movie. I think that the way the media responds to the movie is always really interesting to me. People who, I've read reviews where people are like, wow, this is really great that it's so balanced. I've read reviews that are like, oh, this is so one-sided. I've read reviews that are like, wow, they really or kind of came down harsh on Ross. Oh, they didn't come down harsh enough on Ross. And it's kind of a Rorschach test for, I think, your own perceptions of these cases. I think that it's human nature to not be able to grapple with unknowables. And I think that what is the answer to the drug war? What is the answer to the conundrum about when is privacy and security, when do they collide? How do we have security and privacy? It's an unknowable right now. And I think it's human nature to go, I can't stomach the unknown. I'm going to side on one side of this or the other. And the movie definitively and intentionally does not let you do that. It continually shows another side and another side and another side. I think there is an underlying compassion for the human beings in the story, but I would not say it's an exoneration of those people.
We're at a turning point right now with the drug war where we're seeing legislation change. As you said a little while ago, at 100 miles an hour. We look back on the 80s, we look back on the crack epidemic, we look back on 3 strikes as complete failures, total mistakes. Incarceration rates are through the roof. They become private prisons. It doesn't make any sense. Do you think this moment in time with Ross, this case, we're going to look back on in 10, 15 years as a complete mistake?
Well, I think that there are mistakes being made. I think that we are in a turning point of many turning points. We're in the infancy of the digital revolution. This is the beginning. This is the beginning of the black markets. It's the beginning of privacy and anonymity online. All of these things are at the beginning. And some kid right now is sitting in a basement coding something that's going to change everything. And they'll end up buying AOL and we'll be working for them. Yeah. And they've got pictures of Ricky naked, so he's going to get AOL real cheap.
Sold.
So I think that we are at a turning point on the edge, on the cusp of many, many, many turning points. So, but the sad reality of it is when I told the Napster story, when I first met Fanning and Parker in 2001, and they were just being decimated personally and financially by the record industry and other industries, I remember thinking, and again, it's not to exonerate them because it was a messy, complicated thing, right, Napster, but I still remember thinking, God, it's such a shame because in 5 years this is all going to just seem laughable when everybody is using these technologies and the record and the movie industry is using basically the essence of peer-to-peer technology to distribute. And here we are 15 years later, and we've made so little progress, and there's still so many people pounding tables talking about what an evil Napster was and resisting these changes, and industries are dying and other industries are going, oh, really? You don't want this industry? All right, we'll take it. You got Hulu and Netflix and all these people just going, great, we'll run with this ball if you don't want to. And, it's sad and frustrating how slow change comes. So I do think that without a doubt, in 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it takes, online drug services are going to be a thing. They will be regulated probably. They will be, helping move drugs out of the criminal space and into the mental health space where they desperately need to go so that people can get the help they actually need and not just get felonized and thrown into a prison for the rest of their lives. So I do think that the world is going to change. I think that the marijuana policy we've seen, the changes in mandatory minimums that we're seeing, I think technology is really helping drive policy in the right direction. And I do think, and again, it's not to exonerate Silk Road or Ross or anything else. It's just to say that, the bleeding edge changes things. And usually human beings will pick those technologies up and use them for good. And we will be seeing technologies down the road that look a lot like the darknet today, and probably Ross will still be sitting in jail.
Absolutely. Well, time to take some questions. I'm going to go to Brad here, right up here. He's doing periscoping this. I think he's got some questions coming in, right?
I actually have one for me.
Go for
I
it.
do. I was waiting for Periscope questions. I'm a very large proponent of Bitcoin, and whenever I talk to anybody about Bitcoin, Silk Road gets thrown in my face. And I work with people that do so much with blockchain. I'm seeing a project where they're trying to bring internet to places in Africa using the blockchain and satellite phones and things like that. And I'm just, how you talked about it a little bit, but do you talk about the blockchain? Do you talk about how Bitcoin was affected and all that stuff and everything?
Yeah, we do. I mean, Bitcoin and the blockchain are extremely complex technologies and have a lot of implications. And frankly, the movie couldn't stop. And we actually tried. The movie, when I first started making the film and docs always get narrower and narrower as you go. They have to, because they have to be focused on a central story. I shot Gavin Andreessen up in Amherst. I talked to everybody from the Bitcoin world. And almost none of that ended up in the film because it was two reasons. One, it was tangential to the central story, and two, it's insanely complicated, and it's very difficult to explain Bitcoin and the implications of Bitcoin in an hour and a half. I do contend there's a movie there. It's definitely not the one that I made. You can't make a movie about the Silk Road and privacy and anonymity movements and a movie about cryptocurrency and the blockchain. The blockchain has, and again, I'll say this right up front, I'm not one of these like Bitcoin hedge fund and evangelist rah gold 2.0 people. However, the blockchain has a capability of changing the world in ways that are far reaching than people understand at the moment. And in many ways for good. And it took hundreds and hundreds of years for the basic laws of contract law to sort of enter into human civilization and get ironed out. The blockchain has the capability of dismantling all of that and rebuilding it from the ground up. So there's a lot on that sweater. If you want to pull on that thread, there's a lot there. And I do believe in the efficacy of that movement. And Amir Taki, who's in my film, and the hacker squat that I visited in London, which is in the film, those open source programmers, I would say, are at the front end of dealing with blockchain technologies for exactly the purposes you just mentioned, in terms of dealing with micronations, helping those nations. The Bitcoin's helping a lot of people in Africa already. But again, I mean, most of the people who are watching this are probably just going, what? I thought it was for buying stuff on the internet. And so it's a rabbit hole, but I certainly do take an interest in it.
Question?
Thanks so much for coming in, Alex. Just a quick question. Where and when can we see the film?
The movie premieres on Epix on Sunday night. That's May 31st at 8 p.m., and then it will play on Epix for a while, and then later, I think in the late summer, it will appear on everywhere else: Netflix, iTunes, Amazon, all that. But it will be on Epix and very seeable there for a while, starting Sunday.
One thing that I forgot to mention is that Keanu narrates the film.
He did.
What made you ask Keanu Reeves to narrate the film?
Well, Keanu was.
Why is that funny?
It's funny. Look, even we knew it was funny. Okay, so I'm just gonna cut to the chase. But Keanu was watching this movie from the beginning. He was sort of a consulting producer on it, and has a great interest in this world and in these technologies, and was kind of riding shotgun on the movie. And it was getting closer to being done. I was about to go to South by, and I realized I had this I'd never thought about the VO because I was so busy trying to make the movie make sense. I hadn't really thought about the more cosmetic aspect of it. So it just seemed like an obvious thing to do for me, on two levels. The most important level was his voice. I really wanted somebody who I knew would be able to add emotionality to the story without imposing an editorial perspective, because the narrator of this movie is not the guide of the movie. The guide of the movie is really Andy Greenberg from Wired and Lynn and Kirk, Ross's parents, and they are very definitively taking us through the story. They are the voice of this movie. I did not want this voice of God to show up and tell you what the movie was saying. And Keanu, from a performative standpoint, is really good at doing that. He has emotionality, but he can kind of neutralize himself enough that he doesn't impose himself overly. So it was performative first and foremost. And then, secondarily, I guess there were three things. I knew he actually understood what the hell was going on. And most people that I was thinking of that were also on my list of VO people, I knew I would have to spend weeks explaining to them what Tor was, Bitcoin was. And if you have a narrator who's telling you about the deep web that clearly has no idea what he's talking about, it doesn't matter how good they are. You're gonna call BS on that, right?
Can you record that VO of someone so we can hear it?
The deep web.
Tor?
Yeah, Tor, the onion router. Oh, God. So I knew that he would actually know what he was talking about. And then third, certainly the fact that his voice has implications from that world via Johnny Mnemonic, via The Matrix. He's done other roles in that space that are formative. And so, I liked the idea of this guy taking you into the deep web, which is really confusing, to people. Having that kind of calm of going, oh, cool, it's Reeves. All right, I'm all right. And it has that effect. It's psychological, but you're like, that's cool, I get it. He explained The Matrix clearly enough, So, and that made no sense at all. If you follow that, you're like, batteries? What? You don't want to follow that thing to the end, right? So this actually makes sense. So there was that aspect. It didn't, funnily enough, the bill intent of it all did not hit us until we gotten all the way through the process, all the way through record, and literally was about to leave the VO. We were like, oh, the Bill and Ted community is going to totally weird out.
The
But
Bill
it
and
was
Ted
too late.
community.
Yeah.
That community.
We really
By that you mean everyone.
we really respect the Bill and Ted community. We do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. Before the movie came out, I should ask, before the movie came out, there was a lot of talk of Bill and Ted 3 or a reboot of some kind. What's going on with that? Is it?
We're working on it, and we're getting really damn close. So we're getting really close. It will either be, So it's Hollywood. So we'll either be making it soon, or we will be making it not soon, or we will not be making it at all. It will be one of those three options.
Next question.
Thanks. So we touched on it earlier, and we talked about education. So this is one piece to even bigger puzzle of education and how we educate, and where this education comes from. Is it going to come from the institution? And if it comes from the institution, how does it come from the institution without staggering innovation and all those things?
That is a really good question. That is part of the conundrum, because while there is a desire for education, there is also an equivalent resistance to that education. And that comes from fear. People are afraid that if the public becomes encryption happy, that suddenly law enforcement will not be able to do its job at all. There is a fear that if suddenly the public becomes privacy active or aggressive, that Google is not going to be able to make any money. Those are two very significant fears. So it is difficult to get educated in this area. It is difficult to find the right information. I do think it's incumbent, unfortunately, there's a lot you can do. We live in the information age. If you are halfway good at surfing the internet for information, there's ways of getting pretty much whatever you need. However, it is incumbent upon the government and corporations to change their attitude a little bit. And I think the government has to get a little bit more relaxed in this notion of encryption, that we do need encryption technologies, we do need privacy. Tough doo-doo. It may make your life a little harder. We need it. We need a lock on our front door at home, so that means you have to get a warrant before you're able to get us to unlock that door. It's got to be the same in the digital space. It's just the way it is. It sucks for some people, but sorry, I would rather not have you invade my digital space without a warrant, if possible. So it's incumbent, I think, upon a shift in attitude from that side to say, okay, you may have something to hide without having something to fear. To change that horrible term around a little bit. And then from the corporate side, third party, you give your life away to these companies, and they are using your private information for all kinds of really, really horrible horrible, invasive things that if you knew about would completely bug you out. And there are people sitting in rooms in various parts of the world right now that are doing underground work for major tech corporations that involve listening to you speak so they can figure out metrics about how people speak so they can improve voice recognition software. They are listening to your private conversations. And so the notion that you aren't being targeted, your information is not being utilized is just absolute nonsense. Maybe someone isn't going, oh, Fred X, let's hear what he has to say so we can, arrest him for some false crime. But still, I don't really want people listening to my private conversations. I don't care why they're listening to them. It's none of their business. So I think it's incumbent upon the tech companies as well to embrace privacy and encryption tools for the front end of their technologies, for your phone, for Google, for Facebook, for AT&T and Verizon and the cell services. So there needs to be a shift from the government and the corp side as well.
Last question. Sorry, guy behind her.
Hi. Sorry. On the opposite end of this, have you come across any Robin Hoods in the deep web?
Robin Hood's like people from Omar from The Wire?
No, like someone hacking into
drug
Sally
dealers.
Mae and taking care of our student loans, like somebody that's doing something positive other than.
Well, I would
just
actually argue that almost
surveillancing.
everybody I met on the dark web is doing something positive. So I'm probably the wrong guy to ask, because I generally find that most people in that space are coming from the privacy and anonymity world, and while they may even look scary, it's kind of one of the ironies of the movie, and we did it on purpose, that one of the sort of more seemingly scary, provocative guys in our movie keeps talking about darkness, and he's one of the big open source programmers, and he's the guy in the hacker squad. He's building tools for average Joes to use to help them, have privacy, to help them get jobs, using the blockchain and Bitcoin to help people in Spain where the economy is wrecked to get work. I mean, they're totally socially active purposes. Robin Hoods, in terms of hackers that are stealing my social security number and selling that on the dark net, I don't like those guys. Those aren't the people that I like particularly.
And I mean, also, if you think about who we're talking about, you think about Julian Assange, you think about Edward Snowden and Ross. These are people who are exposing the hypocrisies of our government. Sure, Silk Road was selling drugs or was a facilitator of drug sales. At the same time, it also started this whole conversation about the way that we view the drug war, how the drug war has been happening, and privacy, and anonymity.
Anonymity. Yeah, it's a tough one. Yeah.
And then you think about someone like Julian Assange, who's now living in Ecuador at the moment?
In the embassy, yeah.
In the embassy in Ecuador, and sure, the way that he went about it may not have been perfect, but at the same time, he exposed so many injustices that our government was committing overseas and against us.
Right, exactly.
That's all
So
I
the
got.
bleeding edge is often messy, but it's often for a good reason, and it isn't to totally exonerate these people. These people are complicated people. That's what makes these stories interesting to me, is that it isn't black and white. It isn't to say you must call this person a hero or you must call them a villain. The much more difficult reality is that they are both and neither.
I feel bad. Can we get this guy's question right here, back here? This is the last question. I feel.
He's gonna ask me how you buy drugs on the dark net.
I
Watch.
called him out, and now I feel bad.
Hi. So,
Hello.
with regards to Bitcoin, once again, Bitcoin is used for arbitrage right now. A lot of people buy it just to resell it, and people don't see a lot of value in it. So that's one of the primary reasons they use it. Do you see Bitcoin being widely adopted as dollar, for example, especially with regards to privacy thing where government cannot control it? Do you see it, and with what degree of privacy?
Nobody knows where Bitcoin itself is going. It's really early days. I do believe that it's absolutely, the idea of a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin is not going anywhere. It's in its infancy. It's only getting stronger. It's only getting more uses. People always talk about it being devalued. You're talking about something that was worth $1 at one point, then got way inflated to $1,000 and is now settled in the 200s, which is not actually that big a fluctuation given how new it is. So the fluctuation doesn't matter to me at all. It's clearly being adopted within the marketplace. It's being used more and more and more and more every day. It's not going anywhere. Whether there's privacy, whether it remains unregulated, I think it's unlikely. I think it's unlikely that we will end up with a currency as strong as the dollar that does not have government regulation and oversight attached to it. I think that's highly, highly unlikely. Now, having said that, once the technology is there, you can create whatever kind of cryptocurrency you want. So you can have a regulated crypto. Bitcoin could become regulated, and then you could end up with other ones that aren't. You've seen that happen, as I know it's a weird analogy, but you've seen it happen with BitTorrent, where BitTorrent was perceived as more of a piracy-oriented technology. I would argue that it maybe never was that, but it was perceived that way. It then became very legitimized, and now you have other services that have shown up. They're like, we don't want to be legitimized. We want to be a piracy service. We want to be underground. We want to be a subscription-only torrenting site. So I think cryptocurrency is similar, where you're going to see all these little satellite, little ones that pop up that do want to remain anonymous and outside government oversight.
Before we go, how can people see the film one more time?
On Epix, Sunday night, May 31st at 8 p.m.
All right, Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you. Thank you very much.